There was only one name that mattered: Bumpy Johnson.
October 12th, 1934. The Germania Club, Manhattan. A 350-pound muscle stood up to flatten a man from Harlem. 5 seconds settled the score. It wasn't temper or pride. It was strictly business, pressure, and turf. A local boss stood against a machine built to rule New York and walked out breathing. So, what move did Bumpy Johnson make in that room that froze Dutch Schultz's operation? To get the picture, we have to look at the opening play. Harlem, 1934, 7:45 p.m., Lenox Avenue. The wind sliced through cheap jackets to the skin, and the street was slick from rain that fell hours ago and never really dried. The word traveled down the block faster than the morning papers could print it. Dutch Schultz had sent a crew up to 135th Street to deliver a lesson. The curriculum involved a tire iron and a numbers runner working for St. Clair. 3 guys snatched him on his walk home. They hauled him into an alley and snapped his hands, one knuckle at a time. They took their time so the screaming lasted long enough for the tenants upstairs to hear it and get the point. When the work was done, they left him in the dirt, with fingers pointing in directions they shouldn't, and a note tucked in his coat pocket. The note had 3 words penciled in, pushed down hard enough to nearly rip the page. Bumpy Johnson, Germania Club, 9 o'clock. A kid ran that slip to a joint on Lenox where Bumpy was nursing a red wine that tasted like sawdust and vinegar. The runner was 17, all bones, with eyes that had seen a lifetime of trouble already. He handed Bumpy the crumpled paper and backed off like he had just delivered a bomb. Bumpy scanned it once. He folded it back up and placed it on the bar beside his glass. The kid shifted nervously, waiting for a reaction that never came. "You know what this is?" Bumpy asked, voice flat as a razor. "Yes, sir. Mr. Schultz wants a sit-down. Does he want me, or is he ordering me?" The kid swallowed hard. He said, "If you don't show, St. Clair's people keep bleeding until there is nobody left to count the cash." Bumpy lifted his glass and downed it in one shot. "Give me the details on the clerk. Every bit of it." The kid's voice went quiet. They used iron on his fingers. Started on the left, pinky first, and worked their way down. He was hollering loud enough for folks 3 floors up to hear. Once the left was ruined, they went to work on the right. All 10 digits. It took them maybe 5 minutes. Then they left him leaking there and told him to crawl home and tell Mr. St. Clair that this is the price for forgetting who holds the keys to this city. Bumpy put the empty glass on the wood and stared at the kid with eyes like dead sharks. "How old are you, 17? You ever watch a man get his hands crushed before tonight?" "No, sir." "Now you have. Keep that picture in your head. Remember the sound of it, because that is Dutch Schultz sending a telegram. That is the language he uses when he demands attention." The kid nodded, looking pale as a sheet. Someone in the back corner dropped a needle on a Duke Ellington record. The brass cut through the smoke hanging near the rafters. Bumpy stood and threw on his coat, and a regular 2 seats down spoke up without turning his head. "You aren't really going, are you? It's a setup. Schultz isn't looking to talk. He is looking to make an example." Bumpy did his buttons up slow. "I know the play. Then why walk into it? Tell him you'll meet on neutral turf. Or not at all. Make him come to you." Bumpy looked at him like he was teaching math to a toddler. "If I don't show, Harlem smells fear. If Harlem smells fear, every 2-bit punk with a pistol decides I'm expired, and they come for what is mine. If I set terms, Schultz tells the world I was too yellow to walk through his door, which is the same as hiding. So, I go. And I go solo. I walk out, or I don't. But either way, Harlem knows I didn't fold." The man shook his head and went back to his bottle. Bumpy headed for the exit, then paused and looked back at the messenger. The kid was frozen there, waiting for orders. "Tell St. Clair I am taking care of this. Tell him to keep his soldiers inside tonight. Nobody moves alone. Nobody paints a target on their back. If Schultz wants to send more mail, I prefer he delivers it to me. not to accountants who can't hit back. Yes, sir. What do I say about your location? Tell them I have business downtown. That is all. The kid vanished, and Bumpy stood at the bar for another half-minute, running the angles. Like a chess master studying the board before touching a piece. Schultz didn't need a conversation. Schultz wanted to slap St. Clair in the face, and he was using Bumpy to deliver the sting. The Germania was Schultz's yard, a spot where he made the laws and watched every door. Walking in solo was the only play, because bringing a crew would be signed as an act of open war. The bartender, an old-timer pouring since before the dry laws, slid another glass of red to Bumpy without a word. On the house. You might need it. Bumpy eyed the wine but didn't drink. You figure I am walking into a box I can't break out of. The bartender polished the wood with a rag that was gray with age. I figure Dutch Schultz doesn't ask folks downtown for coffee. I figure when he calls your number, he wants to prove a point. And proving a point usually involves a lot of blood. Then I best ensure it isn't mine. How do you plan to manage that? He has 50 guns in that joint. You are one man walking in with nothing but your name. Bumpy clenched his jaw. My name is the only armor I got, 'cause if I reach for a piece, I'm a corpse before I even flick the safety. If I throw hands, I'm dead before I connect. The only ticket out of the Germania is making Schultz sweat the fallout if he puts me in the ground. And to do that, I gotta stroll in so cool, he starts wondering what aces I'm holding. The barkeep just shook his head, slow and sad. You're gambling your life on head games. I'm betting my life that Dutch Schultz has the brains to see the big picture. That clipping me brings more heat than it's worth. He wants Harlem to heal. He drops me, and Harlem hits the mattresses. If he shames me and kicks me loose, the neighborhood bows down without a wasted bullet. So he'll try to break me, not ice me. And long as he's looking to break, not bury, I got a shot. Bumpy left his glass on the wood and stepped into the October dark. The chill stung his face, while down the block, some dame was screaming her lungs out in Spanish. Her voice bounced off the brickwork. A beat-up sedan rolled by, its busted muffler popping through the alley like a Tommy gun letting loose. 75 minutes to 9 o'clock. 75 minutes to step into a box built to make a man feel small, weak, and terrified. 75 minutes to figure how to turn a setup into a draw, seeing as a draw was the only victory on the table. Especially when you're walking into a game where the house holds every single card. Harlem didn't know what the night held, but the streets knew when Bumpy Johnson left that bar. He was headed for a moment that would either carve his legend in stone or bury it so deep nobody would recall his name come next year. The glue holding Harlem together was about to get tested, with lead pipes and muscle, the kind of brutality that scars you even if you were miles away when the blood spilled. The only question was if Bumpy knew the racket well enough to walk away breathing. 8:40 p.m., and Bumpy stood outside 173 East 3rd Street, staring at a joint that kept its business quiet. The Germania Club had no neon, no sign, just a heavy door flanked by 2 hard cases. Standing there like sentries at the gates of hell, both Krauts, built like tanks, eyeing Bumpy the way a butcher eyes a side of beef ready for the grinder. The big one sported a jagged line from ear to chin, a souvenir from a blade that missed his jugular by an inch. He sized Bumpy up and grunted, his accent heavy. Name? Bumpy Johnson. The goon checked a list like he was booking a prisoner. He spotted the name, scratched a mark, and moved aside without a peep. The door swung open, breathing out the stench of stale cigars and aged timber, and an undercurrent that smelled like cold sweat soaked into the plaster for years. The corridor was tight, barely room for 2 shoulders to scrape by. The haze hung so thick you could watch it swirl with every breath. The bulbs were sickly yellow, turning skin to ash and making eyes look dead. Bumpy's heels clicked on the hardwood, every step a countdown to a collision that hadn't started but was already set in stone. Deep inside the joint, music played. A jazz outfit so far off it sounded like it was coming from under the sea. The beat was skewed, just enough to mimic a heart skipping a pulse. The guard steered Bumpy to a door at the end, rapped twice, waited, then hit it once more. The wood creaked open, and Bumpy stepped into a den where 15 guys stood in a ring, all staring him down like the curtain was up and he was the main event. A kid by the entrance, slicked hair and a cheap suit, smirked at Bumpy like he was in on a gag nobody else understood. You gotta be the Harlem boy, the one thinking he can school Mr. Schultz on business. Bumpy looked through him, stone-faced. I'm the man from Harlem. Who are you? The smirk vanished. I'm the guy who watches what happens when punks like you forget your station. And what station is that? On your knees, praying Mr. Schultz doesn't give you the treatment we gave that clerk tonight. You hear about that work? We snapped every finger on both hands. Took 5 minutes. He hollered so loud the 3rd floor heard it. That's the result when Mr. Schultz sends a memo. Tonight, pal, you're the memo. Bumpy brushed past him without a word and planted his feet in the center of the ring. No handshakes, no hellos. The only noise was heavy breathing and that ghost of a jazz tune drifting in from another world. An older guy, maybe 50, gray at the temples and eyes like chipped ice, stepped out. He wore the look of a man who'd done dirty work for so long that it didn't feel dirty anymore, just a job to finish. Humph. You know where you're standing? I know. You know what goes down here? I got a fair idea. Then you know walking out on your own 2 feet depends on the next 20 minutes. Mr. Schultz doesn't invite people downtown for a chat. He brings them here to make examples. And tonight, you're the lesson. Bumpy's jaw set hard, but his tone remained dead flat. If he wanted an example, he'd have done it in Harlem for the audience. He dragged me here because he wants something, and whatever it is, he figures fear is the key to the lock. The veteran smiled, cold and sharp. You think you got this game figured out? You figure, 'cause you run numbers uptown and folks know your face, you got leverage. But leverage only exists when both sides have skin in the game. You got everything to lose. Schultz has nothing. That ain't leverage. That's just you trapped in a room with 15 heavy hitters who'd snap your neck on his say-so. And the only reason you're still breathing is he hasn't dropped the word yet. Then why am I upright? Because Mr. Schultz needs you to get something straight before you check out tonight. He needs you to get it straight that Harlem is his turf now. The numbers, the banks, the protection, the whole package. And if you or St. Clair or anybody else in the neighborhood thinks they can run business without paying the tax, then what that clerk got tonight is just the appetizer. Bumpy stood dead center in the circle and didn't twitch a muscle. He didn't look around scared. He didn't ask where Schultz was hiding. He just stood there like a man waiting on a result he'd already figured the odds for. And that stillness started getting under the skin of the guys around him. One of the soldiers in the back, a thick guy with hands like sledgehammers, leaned in and whispered, "Why ain't he shaking? He ought to be shaking." The other guy shrugged. Maybe he's dumb. Stupid guys don't last long enough to run Harlem, though. He knows something we don't. The whispers spread through the circle like a crack in ice. Bumpy had walked into a setup meant to break him, but instead of folding, he stood there calm enough to make them wonder if the trap was real. Somewhere a clock ticked. Somewhere heavy footsteps hit the floor, slow and deliberate. The door swung open, and Dutch Schultz walked in. Decked out in a suit that cost more than most Harlem folks earned in a year, he looked at Bumpy the way you look at a problem you're about to fix for good. And when he spoke, his voice was cold and flat as a slab in the morgue. "You made it. I wasn't sure you'd be stupid enough to actually show your face." Bumpy met his stare without blinking. "You sent word to be here, so I'm here." Schultz walked a slow lap around Bumpy, close enough that Bumpy could smell the cologne and the cigar smoke. "You know why you're here? You want to talk about Harlem? I want to talk about how Harlem is my property, how every dollar changing hands up there belongs to me, how every bank, every runner, every protection racket breathes because I let it breathe. And how if I decide tomorrow that I don't want you or St. Clair or anybody else running a thing, then you stop running it. Not because I ask polite, but because I make it so you can't draw air. Bumpy's hands stayed buried in his pockets. If you wanted me gone, I'd be gone already. You brought me here to say something, so say it. Schultz stopped circling and stood right in his face, close enough that Bumpy could see the veins pulsing in his neck. I brought you here to watch what happens when people forget who runs this town. He turned to the circle of men and raised a hand, and a shadow peeled off the back wall. The shadow was a mountain, easily 350 pounds, with shoulders wide enough to block the door, and hands that looked like they could crush a skull, like it was an eggshell. People called him Tiny because the world loves a sick joke, and when he stepped into the light, every man in the room except Bumpy took a step back. Schultz smiled. It was the smile of a man who just played a card he knew couldn't be beat. This is Rocco. Rocco handles my headaches. And tonight, you are a headache. Schultz dragged a chair to the center of the circle and sat down like a judge taking the bench, slow and deliberate, making sure everyone in the room got it that time, moved at his speed and nobody else's. He fired up a cigar with a gold lighter, and the sound of the flint striking was sharp and clear in the dead, quiet room, like a stamp slamming down on paper to make something official. He took a long drag on the cigar and let the smoke roll out slow. Then he looked at Bumpy with eyes that had watched men beg and scream and die, and had stopped caring about the difference a long time ago. Let me school you on how this city works, since you seem mixed up. The cops work for me. I pay 'em more than the city does, and they do what I say. The judges work for me. When I need a case to vanish, it vanishes. When I need someone sent up the river, they go. The politicians work for me because I bankroll them, and they know what happens when they stop being useful. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, holding that cigar between two fingers like a teacher with a piece of chalk before writing a lesson the students better memorize. Harlem is part of this city. That means Harlem works for me. Every number that gets played, I get a cut. Every bank that opens, I get a cut. Every business that wants to stay open, I get a cut. And if someone in Harlem thinks they can operate without paying the vig, then I send guys to explain the new setup, like I sent guys to explain it to that clerk tonight. You hear what we did to him? Bumpy's face showed zero emotion. Good. Then you get that when I call you downtown, you come. Not because I'm asking nice, because I'm telling you. Tonight you're here because I ordered it, and you'll leave when I say you can leave. And between now and then, you're going to deliver a message to St. Clair that he can either pay what he owes, or we'll keep breaking his people until there's nobody left to run his shop. Schultz stood up and walked a slow circle around Bumpy, the cigar smoke trailing him like a ghost. You ain't here to negotiate. You ain't here to make a deal. You're here to listen and nod, and understand that your job is to be a messenger. That's all you are, a messenger. And messengers who forget their place end up delivering their last message with smashed hands and no teeth. Bumpy didn't turn to follow Schultz as he circled. He just stood there, hands still in his pockets, voice flat as concrete when he finally spoke. Harlem ain't something you take just because you want it. The room went silent. Every man in the circle stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped doing anything except watching to see what would happen next. Schultz stopped walking and turned to face Bumpy. His expression was somewhere between amused and annoyed, like a man who just heard a child say something stupid and was deciding whether to laugh or smack the kid for wasting his time. "What did you just say to me?" I said. "Harlem ain't something you take. It ain't a wallet you can lift. It ain't a store you can shake down. This neighborhood runs on its own code, and that code doesn't shift just because you get an appetite for a bigger slice." Schultz's jaw set like concrete. "You think I need a sign-off from you? You think I give a damn about the code? I wrote the code. I am the code. And if Harlem hasn't got that through its head yet, then we keep schooling 'em until it sticks." Bumpy's gaze didn't waver from Schultz. You can teach all day, but get this straight. Every move you make uptown has a price tag. Every guy you bleed, you stack up more enemies. Every time you grab what ain't yours, you make men desperate enough to burn it all down to get it back. You think smashing a clerk's knuckles makes you a king? All it shows is you're good at hurting folks. And when folks know pain is on the menu, they stop worrying about staying safe. They start worrying about settling the score. Schultz moved in, close enough for Bumpy to catch the stale tobacco on his breath and see the vein jumping in his temple. You threatening me? In my house? With my crew watching? I'm telling you how this plays out if you keep pushing. You want Harlem? It's yours, but the bill is going to be higher than you expect. And by the time you do the math, it'll be too late to walk away without looking soft. So, make the call right now. You want to stack cash or you want to prove a point? Because pride is expensive, and I don't think your pockets are deep enough for that tab. The quiet that settled in was the heavy kind that comes right before blood gets spilled or a deal gets cut. Schultz stared him down, and you could practically hear the gears grinding, figuring if this guy standing there had guts or was just plain dumb. Or maybe something worse, something that knew how to play an angle Schultz never saw coming. Then Schultz laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the sound a rattlesnake makes before it bites. You got stones, I'll give you that. Walking into my joint and talking like you hold the cards. But stones don't stop lead, and they sure as hell don't stop Rocco. He turned to his boys, pitching his voice so it carried to the back. You know what burns me up? I hate a guy who doesn't know his station. I hate when some uptown punk thinks he can stroll into Manhattan and talk man to man. We ain't equals. I own the badges, I own the gavels, I own the suits. What do you got? A couple of street corners and the love of folks too broke to count? The circle of wise guys laughed, right on cue. And that laugh cut sharp, like jagged glass. Schultz took a drag off his cigar and fixed his eyes on Bumpy, with a look that might have been pity, if pity wasn't a luxury men like him couldn't afford. You want to know why you're here? I brought you down to show you the price of amnesia. I brought you here so you can crawl back uptown and tell St. Clair and every other mook who thinks they can run business without cutting me in, that this is what it looks like when my patience runs dry. He let the silence hang, heavy and thick, then dropped the hammer. It was meant to slice deeper than a shiv. Guys like you need to know where you belong, and your seat ain't at this table. You don't belong in this room. You belong exactly where I say you do. The mood shifted. The room got cold. The boys shuffled their feet, sensing the show was about to start either a good time or a grim lesson. Depends on if they were smart enough to take notes. Schultz didn't say another word. He just looked to the back and gave a nod so small you'd miss it. Just a twitch of the chin. But that was the signal. Rocco stepped out of the dark, and the wood floor groaned under him, like the joint itself was complaining about the weight. He was a mountain, 350 pounds of beef and scars, with mitts that could tear a phone book in two, and a mug that said he'd done worse to guys who annoyed him a lot less than Bumpy was annoying Schultz. He planted himself a yard from Bumpy and stared down with the dead eyes of a hammer looking at a nail. Runt, I snap you like a twig. Schultz grinned, leaning back with that cigar clamped in his teeth. Rocco here is going to give you a tutorial on respect. And when he's finished, you're going to drag yourself back to Harlem and spread the word about who really runs this town. 60 seconds. That's all there was. Before the violence flooded the room like water in a hull breach. 60 seconds for Bumpy to figure if he could talk his way out of a dead-end street, or if he was going to handle business like he planned, which meant staying alive long enough to make Schultz sorry he ever invited him downtown. The circle opened up wide. The crew stepped back like they practiced it, making a ring with Bumpy and Rocco in the middle. The way they moved said this wasn't the first poor bastard to get crushed on this floor. Schultz got comfortable in his chair, crossing his legs, chewing that cigar, watching like a guy who bought a front-row ticket and expected a hell of a performance. Rocco cracked his knuckles, sounded like pistol shots. Then he rolled his neck, till it popped. He gave Bumpy a wolfish grin, flashing teeth that looked like they'd chewed through gristle before. One hand does it. You're too little for two. The floor squealed under him, and a couple of hard men gulped. Rocco wasn't just big. He was the kind of big that turned gravity into a weapon. The kid with the greaseback hair leaned over and whispered, "This won't take 10 seconds. Less. Rocco's gonna break him like a dry stick." Schultz pitched his voice up. "Rocco, don't ice him yet. I need him breathing enough to crawl home to Harlem. And tell the neighborhood what happens when they get amnesia about who's boss." Rocco nodded and closed the gap. His right paw shot out, aiming for Bumpy's windpipe, the kind of snatch that yanks a man off his feet and squeezes the life out before he can make a sound. That freight train was moving fast enough to shatter a skeleton. Bumpy didn't panic, just shifted half a foot to the left, and Rocco grabbed a handful of nothing. The grip, meant to end the night, found zero purchase, and Rocco's own mass betrayed him, pulling him stumbling into the void where his target used to stand. "Christ," a voice whispered from the shadows. Bumpy threw a single jab, tight, accurate, right into the solar plexus, that button that shuts down the wind. It wasn't meant to snap ribs. It was meant to steal air. Rocco turned the color of ash and clawed at his own chest. Fish out of water, mouth gaping uselessly. The legs quit. All 350 pounds plummeted. His knee cracked the floorboards like a gavel striking a desk. You could feel the thud in your soles. "Stand up," Schultz commanded, cutting through the silence. "Rocco, on your feet." The giant tried, but the machinery was jammed. No oxygen meant no power. He remained anchored, one fist bracing against the hardwood, wheezing like he was under 10 feet of water. The desperate sucking for breath was the only noise in the joint. The kid with the grease in his hair stood there, jaw unhinged. "Impossible. Rocco, don't fall." His neighbor gripped his bicep hard. "Zip it. Don't you twitch." Bumpy retreated a step, offering the big man room to suffer. Hands went into his coat. He spoke without a tremor. "I told you. You don't take Harlem, you ask." The room was frozen, all eyes fixed on the spectacle of the ox trying to rise and failing. They watched 350 pounds of prime beef, the unstoppable force, turned into a wheezing mess who couldn't find a lungful of air. The legend of the invincible Rocco was bleeding out on the rug with 15 guys watching. Every man present knew the score changed tonight. Schultz rose from his chair, deliberate and slow. He strolled over to his kneeling soldier. He stared down at the undefeated champion. The hammer that kept the streets in line was broken. Dutchman shifted his gaze to Bumpy. When he talked, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Hoist him. Now." 2 buttons scrambled to drag Rocco vertical. Even on his feet, he looked like a condemned structure after the wrecking ball hit. He swayed, fighting gravity. Air was returning in jagged, painful rasps. Schultz turned his back on the big man like he was yesterday's trash. He locked eyes with the visitor. "You stepped in it. Is that right? You humiliated me in my own house, before my crew. You think that's free?" Bumpy didn't blink. "You invited me down here to send a message. I sent one back. Now the cards are on the table." An old-timer with silver in his hair, a guy who calculated odds for a living, broke the line. He leaned in, whispering so only the inner circle caught it. "Boss, if the street hears Rocco got dropped, every outfit from the Bronx to Brooklyn smells blood. We can't let him leave." Schultz threw up a hand, silencing him. He drilled holes into Bumpy for 30 seconds that stretched like an hour. You could see the gears turning. "Clip him now? Total war with Harlem? Let him go?" And the word gets out. A Harlem operator came downtown and humbled our heavy. Both roads had a toll. The trick was paying the cheaper fare. Schultz finally broke the seal, his tone heavy as concrete. "Get lost." Bumpy stood his ground. "We finished? For tonight. But get this straight. This business stays inside these 4 walls. Silence. From you. From everyone. Because if I catch wind that Uptown is laughing about Rocco, I come north. I torch everything you love until it's nothing but cinders and bad memories. Do I make myself clear?" Bumpy glanced at the Dutchman, then at the giant still staring at his shoes and heaving, like he couldn't process the reality. Clear, crystal, then vanish before I reconsider. Bumpy headed for the exit. The boys parted like the Red Sea. No one barred the way. No one met his gaze. He exited the premises exactly how he entered, cool, collected, untouchable. The latch clicked shut. The quiet left behind weighed more than a scream. Schultz lingered, statuesque. Then he pivoted to his crew, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "This event never occurred." Rocco slipped. That's the headline. "Anyone peddling a different version wears concrete shoes. Capice?" "Yes, boss." "I can't hear you." "Yes, boss." Schultz faced his enforcer, who stood upright, but looked like a train wreck. "You let a runt half your weight floor you. Explain that to me." Rocco sounded like he was gargling glass. He knew the spot. "I never seen speed like that. I don't give a damn about his speed. You're paid to be a wall. That's your salary. That's why the street fears me. And tonight, with 15 guys watching, you dropped like a sack of wet cement. You get what that does to my standing?" Rocco made fists at his sides but kept it respectful. "Won't happen twice, boss." "Damn right it won't. Because if it does, you're off the payroll. Your next boss will be the coroner who tags your toe, and he'll need a shovel big enough for the job." Schultz turned heel, reclaimed his seat, and plucked his stogie from the glass dish. He dragged deep and exhaled a gray cloud. When he spoke, it was a murmur, but sharp. "That man strolled into my fortress and flattened my best soldier, and left breathing. The only reason he's vertical is because the price of his funeral was too high for my business. But don't get confused. This ain't finished. Harlem thinks they scored a victory. They didn't win. They just bought a delay. And the clock stops for everybody eventually." Schultz owned the center of the floor, his tone quiet, carrying the gravity of a judge passing sentence. "Nobody breathes a word of this night. Not a whisper. Not to your pals. Not to your dames. Not even in your own head. This moment dies in this room." The crew nodded, but the Dutchman wasn't satisfied. He paced the line, locking eyes with each soldier, ensuring they knew this wasn't a request. It was life or death. "You think I'm nursing a bruised ego? I'm worried about the bloodbath if the Bronx smells weakness. Once word hits Brooklyn, once every two-bit punk with a heater figures Dutch Schultz ain't untouchable. You know what happens to a boss who looks soft? He gets replaced. Not at the ballot box. They get replaced with lead in the ear and bodies floating in the river 3 days later." He stopped cold in front of the kid with the grease in his hair. "So you walk out that door, you develop amnesia," Rocco slipped. "That's the line. And if I hear a whisper otherwise, the guy with the loose lips becomes a lesson on keeping your mouth shut. Do I make myself clear?" "Loud and clear, boss." Schultz turned his eyes to Bumpy. "You heard me. This stays in this room. You go back to Harlem and keep your trap shut. You don't tell St. Clair you dropped Rocco. 'Cause the second you start chirping, I come up to Harlem and torch it till there's nothing left but cinders. Capiche?" Bumpy stared him down, voice ice cold. "I got it. Then beat it. Silence keeps you breathing. Pride gets you planted." Bumpy stepped out into the chill of the October night. Street was dead quiet, save for a lush passed out against the bricks. He made it 3 blocks before stopping, leaning on a wall and exhaling the breath he'd held since Rocco hit the floor. He knew Schultz's play, protecting his name by burying the truth. And Bumpy was protecting Harlem by keeping the shovel moving. If the story leaked, Schultz has to hit back to save face. Retaliation means war. And war means bodies piling up in Harlem. Innocent people getting caught in the crossfire. So Bumpy keeps his mouth shut, not cause Schultz gave the order, but because silence was the smart play, the move that let him take the win without triggering a disaster. The fallout from that night spread slow, like cracks in the ice. Schultz didn't leave Harlem, but he eased off the gas. The hits on St. Clair's rackets slowed down. The demands for the cut got softer. The violence dropped to a level you could live with. Wasn't a retreat, it was business. A decision that Harlem wasn't worth the price of admission if he had to take it by force. Especially if it made him look weak to the other families watching like hawks. The guys who were in that room, they started acting different. Some ducked the Harlem collections, sending the rookies instead. Others got real careful about whose toes they stepped on. Some just went quiet, like they were carrying a heavy load. Rocco was still breathing, still on Schultz's payroll, but he wasn't the same guy. He stopped running the heavy jobs, the ones where you walk in and the room freezes. He started handling the small-time stuff, shaking down people too scared to fight back. Didn't talk much, kept his eyes on the floor. Nobody said a word about it, but nobody forgot. 3 weeks later, one of Schultz's lieutenants is at a joint in the Bronx. Guy asks him why Schultz backed off Harlem so sudden. The lieutenant was there that night. He saw Rocco drop. He heard the order to keep it zipped. And he knew the truth would get him whacked. So he lied. Schultz figured Harlem ain't worth the headache. Too much heat from the bulls. He's focusing on Brooklyn. The guy nodded and bought the round. That lie became the gospel. Schultz kept his rep. Bumpy kept Harlem from burning. And the truth stayed locked in a back room on East 3rd Street, where 15 guys watched the impossible happen, then agreed to pretend it didn't. That's the code of silence. Ain't about honor, ain't about loyalty. It's just survival wearing a nice suit, and in this life, survival is the only currency that counts. The war didn't end that night, but the rhythm changed. Schultz didn't pull out of Harlem all the way, because pulling out looks like running. And running makes you look weak to every other family looking for blood, looking for a slip in his grip. But he stopped pushing so hard, stopped making examples out of people. He worked around problems instead of smashing through them with tire irons. St. Clair got some breathing room. The hits on his business slowed to a crawl. Clerks stopped getting their fingers snapped. The demands for the envelope got quieter, and Harlem understood without a word being spoken. Sometimes one punch at the right time pulls a whole neighborhood back from the ledge. Bumpy Johnson, standing in Harlem, got rock solid in the quiet that followed. Nobody talked about the Germania Club, but you could feel the shift. The heat died down. Bumpy didn't need the credit, the medals, or the barroom stories. He just needed the peace to hold. And it held. Dutch Schultz kept his name clean outside Harlem 'cause the code protected him. But from then on, he had to do the math different every time he made a move. Harlem wasn't gonna break easy. Harlem had a guy willing to walk into a den of wolves and walk out alive. That made every play more complicated. Rocco lived, kept earning for Schultz, but the legend of him being untouchable died on those floorboards. The outfit still used him for muscle, but they stopped putting him in spots where he had to prove he was still a monster, where everyone thought he was the devil. He became furniture instead of the main attraction, a demotion never spoken, but always understood. The guys who saw it changed too. Some pulled back from the heavy lifting, started working the small-time rackets, where the stakes were low and the risks were light. Some stopped buying the lie that size and a name make you bulletproof. They saw proof that a smaller guy with timing can drop a giant to his knees. That changed how they looked at power. The new order wasn't written in contracts, sealed with a handshake, or enforced with a peace. It was written in a split second, 5 seconds when nerve and timing came together to create an outcome nobody saw coming. Everybody had to swallow that pill. True authority didn't come from being the biggest, the nastiest, or the guy packing the most heat. Real power came from the smarts, the discipline, knowing exactly when to pull the trigger and when to walk away. It came from understanding that sometimes the smartest play was letting your enemy bury himself, getting so scared of losing his rep that he quit taking the risks that made him big. Schultz was still a threat. Harlem was still feeling the heat, but the scales had tipped just enough that staying alive was on the cards. And in a life where most guys didn't make it, A fighting chance was as good as taking the whole pot. That was the lesson of October 12th, 1934. Not that the rough stuff could be ducked, not that the right side beat the strong side, just that sometimes, if you were sharp, quick, and ice cold, you could step into a setup and turn it into a draw. And a draw was the only win for guys without soldiers. We tell this for history and a little thinking, not to push the rough stuff or breaking the law. Appreciate you sticking around till the finish. We put weeks of sweat and digging into these tales. If you respect the code, if you see the lesson Bumpy Johnson taught about standing tall and using your head, smash that subscribe button. Help us hit 1 million members so we can keep delivering the goods. Stories about power used with a brain. Stories about facing the music like a man. Stories about guys who changed the game instead of just whacking the competition. The next piece drops soon. Till then, keep this in mind. Real muscle ain't about what you can wreck. It is about what you choose to build up.